All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Austin, and this is going to be our webinar on project administration here on RedTeam Flex. Also with me today is Sarah. She's going to be monitoring our chat and kind of Q&A. So if anyone has questions during this, feel free to use that Q&A section, and we will either get those answered there or on the call. But let me get my screen shared. All right. So we are already here inside of my project. So two main things we're really going to be covering today. First, we're going to look at vendor invoicing, and then we're going to take a look at customer billing. So starting with vendor invoicing, there's really two different places that you can get invoices entered in from. I prefer personally just doing it from within the project. I think it's a little bit easier that way. We'll take a look at the other option too, but just to point out where that is under companies and vendors, you can get them entered there as well. Again, I like doing it from the project, kind of personal preference, but that's where we'll start. So we have a subcontract with one of our vendors. Let me go ahead and go to the buyout tab, and they sent us an invoice. I want to get that entered in, so I'm going to go to the tools icon of that commitment, and we're going to click create vendor invoice. First thing it's going to ask me for is the invoice number. So you can type in whatever that is. I'm just going to make one up for this real quick. There we go. That's our invoice number. Invoice date, we'll say this came in today. Our payment terms pulled from the commitment, we set that as net 30. So it's going to do the math for me and say that our due date is due on 12/30, 30 days after we receive. And then the period ending date. This is not required, but if the vendor does provide this information, you can enter it in. Basically, we're paying for all work done up until, let's just call it last Friday. And then we can enter in the invoice amount. Now, I always like to say, don't overthink this number. Whatever that total invoice number is what we want typed in here. I'm going to be able to job cost that in the next step. We'll just say this one was $500. The description is also going to pull over from the commitment. This was our masonry subcontract. Now I could add a little more detail here if I wanted to. Also, any special instructions coming from the vendor. And then finally, the attachment area. This is where you're going to upload the actual invoice. So the PDF that they sent you, maybe it was a Word document, Excel sheet, whatever it may be, you can get that uploaded here, just so you have that actual invoice attached to it in RedTeam. But we will go next step from here. As I mentioned, this is the job costing step, where I'm going to take that $500 and apply it to the line items that we built out in the commitment. Now, ours is pretty simple. We made one line item for masonry for $1,500. So that's where my $500 is going to go. But perhaps there are multiple line items, maybe multiple cost codes were on this commitment. Those are all options. If that's the case, you would be able to distribute that money out. Like I said, in our situation, we just have the one line item. So right here is where our 500 is going to go. And it's going to do a bit of math for me. It's going to tell me, hey, this is 33% complete. And then we're going to have a remaining open balance of $1,000. So I can then click calculate, and it's going to do a little bit more math for me. So invoice to date, this is our first invoice, so $500 there. Total retainage, we're retaining 10% from each invoice. So that's $50 so far. Making our subtotal before tax, $450. I didn't apply tax to this commitment, but if I did, it would do that math for me as well. So our authorized amount will be $450. Now going back to retainage, if you need to adjust this retainage, maybe this is the final bill, you're trying to release it, you can click adjust, and you'll have the option to adjust total retainage. So that would be, kind of as the name suggests, the whole retainage amount, or current retainage. That would be the retainage just for this invoice. So if for whatever reason, this single invoice, we're not going to charge or not going to hold retainage on, we can zero that one out. Right, but we will leave that as is. Looks good to me so far. So we will go next step, which will be to verify credentials. Now, this was already done when the commitment was set up. We don't have any here, but really we're just making sure nothing's expired in that time. So next step again is going to be lien waivers. Now, RedTeam Flex does not generate or create those lien waiver documents for you. But what we do is give you a place to track and store them. So I have lien waivers turned on for this. So what it did is create our vendor, we do it all, as a claimant. So I'll now be able to go to the lien waivers section and upload those forms as I get them. So if I got a release form, I'd be able to go in, go to that claimant and upload it. Now, if you don't require lien waivers, that's the setting that I mentioned, it's not going to automatically create that claimant for you. You can still go to the lien waiver section and create it manually, but the require lien waiver setting, like I said, is going to auto create that claimant for you. We'll go next step from here, which is the approval step. And this is where I'm actually going to take a step back. So I'm going to click that back button, and it's going to bring me to the vendor invoice page where we have our draft invoice. Now, depending on how your company operates, this is going to be pretty different for everyone, but you may go through an approval workflow. So perhaps I'm the project accountant. I just entered in this invoice. I want to send it off to typically the project manager, normally the next step there. What I can do is click the tools icon and then click route. That's going to send it through our approvals workflow. So the default approval workflow for RedTeam Flex is it goes to the project manager first. If it's an invoice over, I think it's $10,000, it will then go to the operations manager, and then finally back to the project accountant. If it's a smaller invoice, if it's under that $10,000 mark, then it'll go straight to the project accountant after the PM approves it. Now, that entire setup is configurable, done from the configuration menu under approval workflow. So I would click this route as the person entering this in, and it would go to the project manager. Now, if I route this, it's not going to come to me directly, but I do just want to show where it would go if I was the PM. It would go to my dashboard. If I click on dashboard, I see my inbox right here. My 0 in invoices would turn into a 1, similar to how my expenses are at 3, and I'd be able to view those. I can click on invoice, and I would see them listed here. I'll show expense as an example, but it will list the items, and I would click this review button where it's going to bring me to that invoice. So the invoices would be listed. I can click that blue review button, and it'll take me there. So let me hop back into where it would take me. Go back to vendor invoices. All right, now as the project manager, we'll just assume that's the next step there. I'll be reviewing this invoice. I can look over, but primarily go to step 2, where as the PM, most likely I'm the one who's going to know if 33% of our masonry work is actually complete. I can verify that. I can accept it, right? Retainage looks good. If I'm happy with this, I can commit it straight from this page here in step 2. So I can click that commit button. That's going to change it from draft status to committed status, where I can then go through, verify everything else, anything else I need to, before making my way back to step 5, that approval step. Now, here is where I'll be able to rate the vendor. So how have I liked working with them? I think they're pretty good. They're not perfect, but they're pretty good. If I know, I can put the payment information, whether that's going to be partial or final, the waiver, if it's unconditional, conditional, or none, and the pay on date. I would then click approve. That's going to send it to the next person. So that will go on until it reaches the final person. So whatever your workflow looks like, but we'll just assume it's going to end back at the project accountant. So same steps as there as the project accountant again. I can see it in my dashboard. I can go to it. What's going to be different for the final person in the workflow, they're going to have this checkbox right here. It says execute this disbursement upon authorization, or rather execute this disbursement authorization upon approval. If I check that box, when I approve it, it's going to execute the document. So I'll click that approve button. Now, why that is important, it depends on kind of your accounting situation. So close this out. Basically, you can only you can only execute the invoice once it's been authorized by everybody, once it's been approved by everybody. Only executed invoices are payable. Now, if you happen to be using QuickBooks Online, so as an example, we would send the invoice to QuickBooks once you commit it, but it won't be able to be paid until it's been executed. If you're not connected to any of our accounting systems, then still means the same thing for you. It would be committed, but you won't be able to enter a payment from the tools icon until it's been executed. Now, our database is connected to QuickBooks, so I don't have that option to enter a payment because that would be paid in QuickBooks, and then that information would flow back into RedTeam Flex. But if we weren't connected there, I could click the vendor payment button at this point and then manually enter that we paid this invoice. That is when my balance will shift over to the paid amount. Now, I want to take a quick stop for questions and see if we have any questions so far.
I am not seeing any in the Q&A at the moment, but feel free to drop them in there, guys. We'll get them answered for you either during a break or I can type you back an answer if needed.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. So let's minimize this. We'll go back from here. Actually, a couple other things I do want to point out. If we scroll over, I just want to point a couple columns here. One being the inbox column. So this one's been approved, so it's already done. But if we sent this through the approval workflow, I'll be able to check here whose inbox it's in. So if I've been waiting a little bit for this invoice, it's not getting moved through, I can see here, and maybe it would say PM, right? The PM's looking it over. I can go bother that PM and say, hey, where are we at on this invoice? Another thing it's going to show, again, for our QuickBook users, is the QuickBooks column, and it'll say pretty much its status in QuickBooks. And looks like this has not been sent just yet. It may take just a minute, but eventually it'll have a little chain icon indicating that it's linked. If there is any kind of issue, or maybe it gets deleted in QuickBooks, I'll be able to check that here. Another thing I like to show from this invoice screen, if we go up to our view icon, so I like to call this the reports icon, where you find all your good reports, your payables aging is going to be found here. So important report, people like to know. Now, I did mention at the beginning, so that's how you're going to fully walk through the invoice. Did mention at the beginning that there was 2 different places where you could enter them. I prefer doing it in the project. That's how we saw it. I just want to show where the other one is now. We'll actually go to vendors over on the side. And then if I go to the invoice tab up at the top, we're going to see really all of our invoices. I can also click the plus sign here, and I can create my vendor invoices from this page. Now, I do need to give the project number and commitment number in this case, so just kind of 2 other bits of information I got to plug in before getting to that exact same screen that we saw. So that's kind of why I prefer to do it from within the project. However, if you're an accountant with a stack of invoices you need to get entered in, this one may be a little easier for you. You don't need to click into a bunch of multiple projects. Do want to point out another option on here. Second option down, there is no open commitment related to this invoice. This is an option within RedTeam Flex. There doesn't have to be a vendor commitment in order to write an invoice. Maybe you got your invoice for a dumpster, perhaps. You probably don't have a purchase order or a subcontract for that, but you still want to get that entered in. You absolutely can. In that case, there's just a little more information that we need to know. who the vendor is, what type of invoice it is, the project, the scope, and then I can add my cost code information, click save, and then we'll go to the same steps that we just walked through. Third option on this list is import vendor invoice from a spreadsheet. So if you have a lot of invoices that you need entered in, we do have an import option for you. So you can download the template, fill that out, and then upload it here. Then I want to hop over to payments from here. And let me kind of filter to expand our date range a little and see if I can find a payment to show. Okay, there we go. Let's look at. Okay, well, we got one. That's fine. If I click the tools icon, I can view this. So this is the payment information that you could either manually enter in. In our case, it came back from QuickBooks. I mentioned we're connected to QuickBooks. If I view this, we'll see some of that payment information. I can also click on notifications from that tools icon as well, which is going to give us really a nice notification of payment option here. So say the payment's ready, I'll get some good info here. It'll also have the lien waiver status on it as well. Just wanted to point that out. Not a ton of people are familiar or know that that's there.
And Austin, I actually have a great question for you. I did type an answer, but someone asked, is there an ability to require that lien waivers be uploaded in order for invoices to be submitted?
Gotcha. So I don't believe there's an exact requirement with RedTeam Flex. There might be through Team Player, because I believe they can upload those into Team Player. Not 100% sure, but I can look into that a little bit more. However, within RedTeam Flex, because the vendors aren't exactly entering their invoices into Flex, they're kind of sending them to you and then you're entering them in. There's not a exact requirement for them. But there is that require lien waiver setting that I talked about that will kind of create a claimant for you so that you can enter that waiver in. All right. Any other questions so far?
No, not at the moment. Oh, wait, hold on. Just saw a couple more come in.
Awesome.
It says when the vendor invoice is created, can the current and open amounts be restricted to that invoice date only? As in, if I see the invoice from August, can it show me the current and open in the month of August and not today?
So that current and open is going to be for the total commitment. So it would be, so the remaining open amount would just be the total remaining open, and the current would be any previous ones. There's not going to be a way to restrict that by date, unfortunately.
Perfect. And then I have a couple other team player related questions, guys, which we'll have to get back to you on. One is asking about those requirements, the lien waiver requirements in team player. So we'll look into that. And the other one is asking, is there a fee to create an invoice on the platform? There is not a fee to create an invoice on RedTeam Flex. We do have a per invoice processing fee through team player if you're having your vendors submit items through team player. But I think that's all we've got at the moment.
All right, awesome. So that was really everything on the vendor side. If anyone has any other questions, do feel free to ask, but we're going to kind of shift over and look at the customer side of this. So billing. So let's dive into that project we were just in. And I'm going to go to the billing tab here. Now, before we can actually create our first bill, I'm going to want to make sure that we have our schedule of values made. Now, this could be done as early as request status, so it may already be done at this point. I normally like to save it for now in our training webinars to go over this. So I'm going to get there from the home icon, and I can click on schedule of values. which is going to take us to step 6 of our project setup, where we'll see the schedule of values. Now, I currently don't have one. That's completely fine because we're going to make one. I have several different options for doing this. First, if we click the plus sign, I can add schedule of values. I can build this out manually. I just need to say what type this is. Is this an overhead, profit, or an SOV line? Give it a description or a title, and then a value. So I can go through and create my SOV line by line. However I want this to look, I can make it look that way. This does not have to match the estimate. It does not have to match the budget. What I normally recommend doing, though, is actually go back, and from the plus sign, I think it's easy if we import it from our estimate. We made an estimate in this project, so I'm going to import from there. It's going to ask me a couple questions. One, what do we want to import by? By cost code, by division, or by assembly? And then, what do we want to do with our overhead and profit, essentially? Select an allocation method. So it'll show 2 line items, our overhead line and our profit line. If I select no allocation, it's going to show both those lines. I could allocate indirect cost, which is going to hide that overhead. It'll essentially take that number and evenly distribute it among the rest of the SOV lines. Or I could say allocate indirect cost and profit. It'll take our overhead, it'll take our profit, and it's going to hide those numbers for me. We'll go ahead and select that option, and I'm going to click continue. And it's going to populate my schedule of values here. And I'm seeing a little rounding, well, kind of a big rounding error. Oh, because I said, oh, never mind. I forgot to check something. That's totally fine. But what I want to point out at this point is, even though it created it for me, I think this is a great starting point. But I may not want everything to look exactly like this. Perhaps I want to change a few things in here. Maybe actually I see a couple $0 items. Those were probably items that I added to my estimate that I didn't actually use. I could just delete those right from here, get them removed. I can also edit anything on here. I can click that pencil icon. I can change the name of things, change the value, so I can move money around if I want to. Again, you may not want this to look exactly the way your estimate did, but it gives you a good starting point and you can make all the changes that you need to. So those are kind of your different options for creating the schedule of values. Now I have this rounding discrepancy here. I know exactly what that's from. Totally forgot I put a $0 value on the contract for this. So it's just kind of correcting that. So I'm just going to delete that. Now I'll get a warning at that point that our schedule of values is different than our contract value. Typically, you will always want those numbers to be the same. So if you ever see this warning, kind of look into this. You want to make sure you're billing for everything. Like I mentioned, I put $0 on our contract value. So these are going to be different. That's okay for me. I kind of want it to be in that case. So $2,022 is our total that we're going to be billing for. And do we have any questions so far on the schedule of values here, or even back on invoicing?
The only one I just answered was, can we delete multiple SOV items? And right now, as you can see, we don't have a checkbox. So you need to go ahead and just hit the trash can to delete each individual item. But if you needed to replace a large number of items, do keep in mind, if you haven't started billing, you can always re-import, and that's going to override everything that exists here already. Of course, that import feature is disabled once you've started billing, but prior to billing, I would recommend a re-import if you need to get rid of a large number of items.
Yep, absolutely. You could re-import it. And also, I mentioned importing from the estimate. You can also import from a spreadsheet as well. So just import schedule of values. I can download the spreadsheet and plug it in here. Once we start billing, as Sarah mentioned, it is going to kind of lock the SOV from being imported. However, you can still make changes to anything from there. So you won't be able to import it. You will not be able to delete any line items that you bill against, but you can make edits if needed. All right. So we'll go back from here. So now that we have our schedule of values created, we can start working on our bill. This is a fixed price job, so we're doing progress billing. So I'm going to click the plus sign. We'll add a progress bill. And then we'll start filling out some general information. So invoice number, we'll just keep it at 001. That's fine. Our billing terms were net 30. We'll put in today's date. Once again, it's going to do the math for the due date for me. And then it's going to ask me to select the executed by. This is essentially just whose name do you need on the bill from your company. We'll just say we need, oh, there's my name. Well, we need me. My name's on here. I then want to select who we're sending this to. Is this going directly to the customer contact, in which case I can select who that is. Looks like that's Anthony in our case. Is this going to a third party? I can select the contact for that. We also have this other or in care of option, which is going to allow you to type in who it's going to. Great option if your customer is running everything through a bank, perhaps. You got to send it all to the bank. You can just type in the information here. We'll say that we're sending this directly to the customer, though. I then need to put in the period ending date. I'll set that as today as well. We're billing for all work done up until the end of November. If I want to CC anyone, I could do so here. I can also do that when we go to send the actual email. I can also put in a description of work completed. Select who they need to remit to. We'll go RedTeam Construction Company. And then the billing format. Now, there's a few different billing formats that we have. We have a standard kind of RedTeam progress bill. We also have a letter format, but then we have two AIA style formats. The most updated one, and this is the G702, 703. The most updated one is the 1992 version. So we're going to go ahead and use that one. Do feel free to check out the others that are in here. And then as we scroll down, we're going to see the schedule of values that we just created here. This is where I can start plugging in some information. Now, up at the top, I have this billing adjustment area with a few different options I want to point out. First is bill entire project at 100%. If this is the final bill, I can check that box and just kind of be done with it. It'll make everything 100%. I'll be good to go. I can adjust retainage from here. So again, check that box. You can adjust retainage. So once again, final bill, I want all my retainage released. I can zero that out. Do also want to point out that you can adjust the retainage of individual line items as well. So you'll be able to do that too. And then we have an option for cost plus. If you do cost plus billing, we're going to walk through that pretty quickly. You can check the box. And what that's going to do for you is make column G, and right now, clickable. From there, I'll be able to click on those numbers, and it's going to open up with our actual costs. So we're going to see that invoice that we just put in. So this is going to allow me to select the box. I can click include and attach that invoice to this bill. It'll add that $500 in here. It'll add in my costs, and then I can add my fee. So cost plus fee. It's also going to attach those invoices. So the customer, when they get this, is going to be able to see those invoices there. Now, eventually, this section is probably going to be filled with a lot of different data. Something important I like to point out is that you can filter this. So instead of scrolling through all of your actual cost transactions, you can filter for what you're looking for. And real importantly, you can filter by cost code. So I clicked the masonry line of the SOV. I may want to filter, unselect. I may want to filter to just see the masonry costs that we have. I can select that, filter and hide, and we'll see that same one masonry invoice that we just entered in. So good way to really narrow down what you're looking for to make it easier to add what you're trying to add. So we'll close that. Now, if we were using cost plus, that's how you're going to do it. Without using cost plus, you can just leave that box unchecked. And then you kind of have two options of how you're going to add costs, either by a percentage or by an amount. You can flip back and forth, and different lines can be added differently. So for masonry, for example, I can click on amount, go right to column G and say, hey, we're going to add $500 here. That's going to be 33% of that column. If I look at the bottom, it's 24% of the entire project. I could then go to percentage and add something differently there. We can say, I have an example markup right here. We're going to charge 10% of that. It'll do the math in column G for me. So whichever one you choose, just want to show you can kind of flip back and forth. It'll do the math in the opposite column. And then at the bottom as well, we'll get our totals. So if I leave this as is, we're going to be billing for $505.25. So 24.99% of the total project. Now, this is really kind of the key and core part of creating the bill. Any questions on this?
So I do have one question that looks like it's configuration related, Austin, which is, can I make changes in the written content above the contractor's signature? Now, I assume they're asking about on the bill, but it doesn't specify. So if you can drop into the Q&A for us a little bit of clarification on if you're looking to edit within the customer bill, we can always show you what the capabilities there are in the configuration menu.
We can go into that. Yeah, and just note, it is pretty limited with what you can change to the bill, especially those AIA ones. The RedTeam one, we have a little bit more options for, but it is kind of limited on there.
Yeah, and they just confirmed it is with the customer bill, and I do believe we can edit just a couple of small things, but I don't think you're able to make a large amount of changes to the language there.
Yeah, it's really just the footer section is kind of all you can add information into. Yeah, but we can hop down in configuration and take a look at that. But let's finish creating this first. So we will go next step here, which will just be tax. We're not adding any tax here, so really nothing to do there. And then attachments. If there's anything I want to attach to this bill, I could do so right here. Before getting to our final step, that confirmation page, we'll go ahead and close out that form. So I'll see my bill listed here. Now, as a quick aside, let's hop down to that config menu now, just to show what our options are here. If we go under the project column, we can see customer billing. And I'll have our options here. So we're in our training database. We have a handful more. But let's look at that 92 AIA form. If I click the tools, edit that, there is some text that I can put in the footer, but that is really about it. And if we check the RedTeam, the standard progress bill, I believe that is more or less the same. We can edit the preamble section and then the footer as well. Let me scroll. Yeah. So in the RedTeam one, we can edit the footer, which is where those signature lines are going to go, and the preamble, which is the above part. But the AIA one, we can just add some information to the footer there.
Perfect. Thanks, Austin. I think we've got all questions answered at the moment.
All right. Perfect. So let's excuse me. So let's get back into that project, into our billing tab. Now, our bill's in draft status, so nothing's really happening just yet, but I can double check my work, make sure this is right, everything's good to go. I can click that tools icon and commit it. So note with QuickBooks users there, once again, committing this is what's going to push it over to QuickBooks. It doesn't have kind of that same approval workflow that we talked about with invoices. So once it's committed, you'll be able to pay it, or receive it rather, in QuickBooks. Once you enter that in, that receivable amount will move over, or the balance rather, will move over to received. So it'll be entered there. If you're not connected to an accounting system, you'll be able to go to the tools icon and add a customer payment. So you can manually enter once you've been paid, moving over that balance to the receive section. But let's take a look. I'm going to click the little view icon. We'll take a look at that bill because I want to email it out. This is that AIA style bill. So we're going to give some good information. The original contract sum, again, mine set to $0. But our schedule of values, 2000 is what we're billing here. So completed and stored to date, $500. As I scroll down, we're going to see that whole schedule of values area. So I'll see really what we entered in. So we're billing $500 for masonry and then $5.25 on that example line item. And then at the bottom, we'll have kind of a bit of change management, a little bit of change order details too. So I now have the option to email. I can send this out to our customer. Or if we're connected with DocuSign, this is one of the items that you are able to send with DocuSign as well. But then again, either way, once I get that sent out, everything's signed, everyone's happy. We'll eventually receive that money either via QuickBooks or manually through the tools icon, where that balance amount will shift over to received. And then I also want to show from the view icon here is going to be our receivables aging. So payables aging is under the vendor invoice page, which you can find in buyout, and the receivables aging is under the billing tab. And that is really about all that I had for today. Do we have any questions thus far?
Austin, we did actually get one last question before we go.
Oh, perfect.
So billing is for an individual purpose use for a project or only a whole company?
So the billing will be to bill on an individual job. So what we did, we had I believe our project was like an ER room that we were building, and we were billing against that project to the customer.
Perfect. Hopefully that answers your question. If not, please let us know. We'll keep it open here for a moment.
All right. Well, thank you everyone again. We will talk to y'all next time. Have a great rest of your day.